Our next session is something that I look forward to so much every year, and it's always terrific to have speakers like Manny Scott to really challenge us. But I will tell you, I love nothing more than to hear from our colleagues. And we have three outstanding colleagues this morning who are going to engage in our Ignite sessions. Very little pressure on them to come in front of all their colleagues from around the state, and they have a very short period of time to go through their slides with this timed Ignite session. And certainly I appreciate the three of them for agreeing to do this. So this is how the Ignite session works, in that I'm going to give you just a very brief introduction of the three of them, and then turn it over to Josh, who will do his piece and hand it off to Antonio, and then who will hand it off to Tanya. And so we have three superintendents that have important messages and stories to share with you. Our first speaker this morning is Josh Baccagalupi, who is the superintendent of the Dryden Central School District, where he has been the superintendent since 2018, is a veteran of the conflict in the war in Afghanistan. I've had the great pleasure of working with Josh and watching him lead in his district and working with his board. I am just so impressed by his work. More importantly, I am thrilled to consider him a friend. I think really sets the bar of leadership, and I can't wait for him to share his story with you. And then we will hear from Antonio Santana from the South Country Central School District on Long Island, who's just in his second year as a superintendent. Lots of great experiences in different districts, but is really one of those early career people who did answer the call of leadership and certainly learn from some great mentors, but he will share his perspective. And then finally, Dr. Tanya Thompson, who is the superintendent of the Binghamton City School District, that she has served for 35 years within that district. Having been the superintendent since 2016, she is her district neighbor's mind. She is an incredibly bright and talented superintendent and leader. She's also a resident of my district, so I have to say nice things, so she votes yes on the budget. And has two beautiful daughters, one of whom graduated from our school district last year and one this year, who, again, I think lives the life of leadership, and certainly I continue to learn a great deal from her every day. So with that, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our Ignite session and our first Ignite speaker, Josh Baccagalupi.
I'm looking over my shoulder here because I'm waiting for that picture of my face to show up again. Just before I came here, my secretary, who keeps me in check about everything, was going through photos, and she commented that she thought I had aged a lot since I started the superintendency. And I said, I don't know, I think I'm holding up pretty good, until I saw that picture and the deep line on my face. I thought, all right, that's humbling. So let's get into it. So words like accelerated collapse, a failed state, chaotic, disordered became the soundtrack for these images and others in Afghanistan in the middle of the summer of 2021. By the middle of August of 2021, the Taliban had retaken Afghanistan, the majority of the country, with the exception of the capital city of Kabul. And Kabul fell on August 15, 2021 to the Taliban. The fall of Kabul sent thousands of Afghans running to the airport, desperate to get out of the country, desperate to get themselves and their families out of the country, anywhere other than their homeland. And while they did so, experts and pundits weighed in on the 20 years, the 2 decades of U.S. and NATO involvement in the Afghani sphere of the global war on terror. And also, reporters offered a lot of historical context for what's become known as our longest war or our forgotten war. The picture on the left was taken in Kabul in the late 1960s when Afghanistan was a moderate to progressive constitutional monarchy. And a series of military coups in the 1970s destabilized the country and set the stage for the decade-long Soviet invasion, which eventually led to the Taliban being able to take power. By the turn of the century, the Taliban had walked back many humanitarian rights that Afghanis had, including the rights of women. By the turn of the century, women in Afghanistan had to be covered by the blue burqa, as seen as the picture on the right. After 9/11, I enlisted as an infantryman, not the smartest move. I didn't realize I could do other things like be a medic or a cook or work in signal. I enlisted as an infantryman and in the Army National Guard. On 9/11, I was in my mid-20s. I would tell you my early 20s, but that'd be lying. In my mid-20s and already teaching, but I felt compelled to serve the country in a different way. And in the fall of 2007, as I started teaching kindergarten, as I had done for many, many years before, our unit was notified that we would be mobilized and deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom at the start of the new year. So as the Taliban advanced slowly on Kabul and the humanitarian crisis was exponentially growing, I had fears, I had feelings of frustration and loss and sadness that was kind of hard to explain to everybody. Only 0.5% of the American population will serve in the military, and 10% of those that serve in the military that are deployed overseas, only 10% of those folks will engage in combat. And I had the opportunity to do both. And I needed to believe that I was proud of the work that our unit had done, and I needed to believe that the work that we had done was not a 20-year mistake. I really had the audacity to believe, I really believed that the work that we had done in Afghanistan had made a difference. Our unit was in country, or downrange as they say, about 6 weeks before our platoon. Our platoon was ambushed just outside of Kandahar. And the ambush began when an RPG struck the Humvee that was just behind us, and it had engulfed in flames. And that explosion triggered the ambush. And after some time, and using our training, the enemy broke contact. That was the first time that we had come into contact with combatants. And our friend and fellow soldier, after that happened, he talked a lot about how it bothered him to see combatants hit by rounds that he had sent downrange. And in a dark day, in the winter of 2013, he took his own life. And that put I didn't do this when I practiced, I promise. And that put the cost of our experience in Afghanistan in perspective. That helped, we had the audacity to serve, but we had the audacity to love and care for each other. And there's a certain trust and vulnerability and gratitude for the people that you've worked with, that you depend on, who you depended on to live. You'd really be upset with them too if it didn't happen. So as memories flooded my mind, of our deployment, I wondered how 20 years of work could fall like a house of cards. I needed to believe that our friend's death was not for nothing. I needed to believe that the 2,400 service members that were killed in the line of duty in Afghanistan was not for nothing. I needed to believe that the 21,000 soldiers that had been injured in Afghanistan was not for nothing, and less so, but to the annoyance of my family very much so, I wanted to believe that the hearing loss that I had suffered during my deployment that requires me to wear hearing aids, which I can conveniently turn off in my house when I don't want to listen to somebody, also had not been for nothing. And more importantly, I needed to believe that the two NGO workers in the Toyota the white Toyota Land Cruiser, which are ubiquitous in Afghanistan, or the British soldiers in their Range Rover, not the really nice ones that we drive, or the girls at the bus stop that were killed in Maine when IEDs went off in their locations, and to which our platoon responded to and supported them in the immediate minutes after their attack, that was not for nothing. As I watched on TV, as the Taliban took over Kabul and people were at the airport and everybody's rushing and desperate, as I watched desperate Afghans tie themselves or hold on to the side of a C-17 as it taxied to the runway and took off, and then only to fall back to earth when the physics of flight overpowered their grip, I thought, my God, they are so desperate to leave that the analysis, whether it's rational or irrational, the analysis was, it's better to take this risk than to stay where I'm from. And all at once, it really did feel in that moment that it was for nothing. 2 years later, I know that my experience in Afghanistan was not for nothing. It's taught me a lot. It's taught me that I can survive, I can do hard things and I can survive them, and I can thrive. It's given me the audacity to be able to lead. If I can do that, I can do this. But at the same time, there are days that I would prefer to put my uniform and go back on and go back to Afghanistan. It was pretty simple there in the sense that all I had to do was live, and all I had and keep the other people around me alive too. Like I said, pretty simple. And our job as superintendents, the work is so much more complex than that. We do have to keep everybody alive. We have to keep everybody emotionally and physically safe. And our job requires us to function at a high level so that our teachers and staff can function at that level, so that our students can achieve and help to build a better world. And we know now, and as we know and we've been talking about, the culture in our country, the polarization of our country, plus my experience in Afghanistan, has taught me that the work that we do is now more important and more urgent than ever. Just like everybody else, we're having difficult conversations. And 2 years ago, our two BOE student representatives were coming to a board meeting today. We're coming to a board meeting to share the results of a project that they had done in conjunction with several community organizations, including law enforcement agencies around the topic of racism. And they were coming to share their findings with the board. I knew that the findings were going to challenge some of our board members' thinking, but I was unprepared for what happened next and how the next 12 months would unfold. Our presentation for our students had to be stopped because of adult behavior in the room. An adult in the room said to a child, "I'm wondering what building in the village you're going to burn down because you believe that Black Lives Matter." And then I was summarily accused of indoctrinating, as if I have the time, the resources, the energy, or even the intelligence to indoctrinate anybody with anything. A former board member who's not on the board any longer started to discuss in social media posts and in conversations with community members and at the board table that people like me, my kind was the word that was used, was too sensitive, which you've already seen, too sensitive and sees everything through rose-colored glasses and wears clothes that are too tight. And I wanted to say, my clothes are tight because you forced me to eat my feelings and my body weight because of the shenanigans. So it doesn't mean anything. So my kind. So I'll admit, and here's a too sensitive moment, I'll admit that it is easier for me to be a part of the 1/2 of the 1% of the 10% club than it was to be part of a club that was labeled my kind. Brené Brown talks a lot about shame, and that shame is a feeling that there's something that's so fundamentally wrong with you that if people knew it, you would be unlovable. And for a long time, I lived in that shame.
We love you, Josh.
Thank you. lived in that shame. And I think my point today is, speaking as a dad, as a superintendent, as a human being, I never want anybody in my community, I don't want my students, I don't want my staff members, I don't want anyone in our community to feel like they live in shame or have to hide in shame, and whether figuratively or literally have to hang, that they determine that a better choice is to hang on the side of an aircraft because they can't stay where they're from because of who they are. So I am a part of the 7.2% of Americans that identify as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I'm gay, super gay. Super. 9 years of Catholic school did not help. I have learned a lot about myself in the 8 years since I have come out. And most importantly, I've learned that I'm lovable. I am not left, I'm not right, I'm not red or blue, I'm not less than, I'm not other, I'm just me. And I'm not trying to make anybody else gay, except maybe Chick-fil-A. It's really just that good. I mean, but what does anyone lose when they let me be me? What does anyone lose when we let our students be themselves? So, I'm in a loving and committed relationship, and this year, about 6 months ago, we made the big step to consolidate households, which required us both selling our own houses and buying a house together with these three munchkins. Miles is 12, and Kate is 10, and Jack is 8. And we bought a house that literally could have been out of the September issue of Architectural Digest Don'ts of the 1970s. And so we did a lot of remodeling in the 6 months, and one of the big focuses this summer was redoing the kids' rooms. So, Miles and Kate had lists a mile long of what they wanted to do. And when it got to Jack's room, he said, "I don't want you to touch my room." He has a it's awesome, this wallpaper mural of a barn and clouds and the sun rising and a brook and a mill, and it covers the whole wall. And it has these 3 geese that are 3-dimensional that are affixed to the wall. And Jack has taken his poster of Jurassic Park of his Tyrannosaurus Rex and has positioned it so it looks like the birds are flying right into the T-Rex, and he is dead set against not changing his room. This irritates Miles and Kate to no end. They are very upset by the fact that that he will not fix his room, and they say that it's modern. They said that the rest of the house is modern, and he's not. And we have said to them, what do you lose by letting Jack have his ugly 1970s mural? And that's really where we started with our board. We started by saying, what do you lose by letting Jack have his mural? And then after 2 years, we had long discussions, painful discussions, about what that means and what we value and what we resent as a community. So historically, we know that there are, in the history of the LGBTQ movement, there are very painful reminders of indifference and intolerance and hate. And indifference, particularly around the HIV/AIDS epidemic when it began, is probably the most insidious. That indifference is almost worse than the hate. But there are moments of great joy and hope in terms of the Marriage Equality Act, models of leaders such as Princess Diana, who really took away the stigma around HIV and AIDS. But there's still much work to be done. And again, because we never want a student to feel ashamed of who they are or where they come from or what they are. And Canada just passed a travel advisory for its citizens for the United States due to the record number of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation from coast to coast. So still much work to do. But as I said, in our district, we have really worked hard at this over the last couple of years. And our priorities this year, we choose 2 priorities every year. One's focused on well-being and one's focused on literacy, and really talking and encompassing it all with the message of that we are all lions. And so I want to leave you with the same words that I end all my communications with. Margot Martin gets them all too, so she knows what I think she knows what I'm going to say. But I always end our communications with our families in this way, and I will give it to you as well. And I hope you take it to heart, even though you're not lions. I apologize. But we always end it by saying, please take care of yourself, please take care of each other, and always lion pride. Thank you.
So, when I first started on this administrative journey, I would have never played a merengue song at work. I didn't want to out myself, and I didn't want to make the people around me uncomfortable. Yet today, I speak to you during Hispanic Heritage Month, and I am in fact, thank you, and I am in fact the second Latino superintendent that's been on this stage, following a gay superintendent. And I'm here to tell you that the world is different, and we're not going back. And this is not a warning, it's a celebration. Yet I know so many of us in this audience feel uneasy about this new and different world. And how do we push past that uncertainty and anxiety to provide environments for our learners that are supportive and positive? Well, before I answer that question, I want to give you a little perspective and context. I want to talk a little bit about myself and the world from which I came. I was born and raised in the housing projects in New York City. And as much as I identify as being Dominican, I never knew my Dominican father. I was raised by my mother, who's Uruguayan, and it's something I never admitted because Uruguay didn't sound like a real country to me. And my mother was the only Uruguayan I knew. But what she lacked in education and in money and in English proficiency, she made up for in courage, wisdom, and vision. She used to look out for us boys from a 12-story window in the project because the projects were in fact tough. We had to walk around with bravado. Some of us walked around with pit bulls. I walked around with a bunny rabbit. And my mother instilled in me these values. And she said, if you want a better life for yourself, you're going to have to work hard, accept help, and really have high standards for yourself. And I did just that, and I gained acceptance to Cornell University. And upon graduating and earning my degree around 1995, I found myself unemployed. But New York City found itself with a teacher shortage, so I thought, serendipity. So I did my due diligence, I did my research, I watched Dangerous Minds, and the pedagogy employed by Michelle Pfeiffer in that movie was simply giving kids candy bars to motivate reluctant learners to learn. I mean, she gave kids a Butterfinger, and that was supposed to be the solution. I worked in Brooklyn in the 90s. I had kids basically threatening to kill me on a daily basis, and I was supposed to give them a candy bar. They would come up to me and be like, yo, Mr. Teacher, you think I'm gonna do a classwork, homework, raise my... Is that a Butterfinger? But the world is in fact different, and we're not going back. It's a lot more complex. There are things that we thought were okay that are just not okay anymore. For example, all these movies we grew up with, Dirty Dancing, classic. But if you look at it with a current lens, the age disparity between Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey is quite alarming. And to make matters worse, her name was Baby. Put Baby in the corner. Also okay was a blatant disregard for safety. I traversed New York City without a helmet, without money, without a means to communicate with my mother, who also thought it was okay for me to dive into rocks wearing a Speedo. Also okay was unmedicated kids and people. We were told to suck it up, to push through it. I dealt with my ADHD by doodling in high school. Also okay was smoking. Ronald Reagan smoked, Hank Aaron, pregnant women smoked, doctors smoked unfiltered cigarettes, and that was okay. And what about kids with guns? And if you think that's cultural appropriation, this is cultural appropriation. And to make matters worse, my headdress isn't from a Native American tribe, it's from White Castle. And all of this was apparently okay, which is not. And there are certain things that are okay now that weren't okay when we were young. For example, taking pictures of your meals and then sharing them, staying in strangers' homes, getting in strangers' cars. Brooklyn used to be tough, a war zone when I was a kid. Now it's a center for entertainment, for good food, for art. Speaking of which, graffiti is cool. And let's not talk about the Barbie phenomenon. At one point, Barbie represented an ideal that could not be met. Now we're all infatuated with Barbie. But there is one Barbie that will never fly off the shelves. Superintendent Barbie. Now, this is fun, but the world that we're living in is in fact tough, and it's really hard being a child growing up in this world. We live in a post-9/11 America. We all experienced the trauma of this pandemic that made us disconnect from each other and connect via technology, hooking us on smartphones or mind control devices, and I see some of you on them right now. And we've been inundated with misinformation or disinformation via social media that's polarized us. Mainstream media is no better. It's subjective at best, and it's on all the time, reporting things like mass shootings or climate change that some still speculate is a hoax, despite these massive wildfires in Canada this year, California last year, the floods that ravaged New York City just a couple of days ago. Do we wonder why we distrust authority, why we distrust science or medicine, schools, law enforcement, government? Does anybody really feel good about this upcoming election? Or is it a cause for stress? And don't fool yourselves. We don't even think for ourselves anymore. We have artificial intelligence thinking for us. And worse than that, think about how it's applied in war. Flying killer robots, drones, that apparently can make autonomous decisions to take out targets. And of course, aliens. How come we don't care that aliens all of a sudden are real? Nobody's reacting to it. This is why there is such a mental health crisis in our country. This is all scary stuff. But everybody in this room has the power and has the ability to cultivate an environment that is positive, to cultivate people that will make the world of tomorrow a better and more caring and more tolerant place by fostering happy stuff. But how do we do it? First and foremost, and this is what's not different, we've got to take care of our own basic needs. And we have to foster an environment that's going to take care of the basic needs of others. I also got to study at Harvard University and speak with Howard Gardner and David Perkins. I was there for 4 days. But we were challenged to create... I had to drop Harvard, sorry. But we were there, and we were challenged to create a hierarchy of needs for school districts, and this is what we came up with. At the bottom of the pyramid is school spirit and culture, followed by student and staff decorum, followed by quality instruction, community involvement, and then you feel fulfilled and achieve that success. Throughout my career, I appreciated the importance of rigor, responsiveness, and relationships. But what's different now is what each of these things mean and how we fulfill them. When we talk about school spirit and culture, we have to engage in social media to combat all the negative posts that we find on those Facebook mom pages and Facebook dad pages. I know we all have them. When it comes to student and staff decorum, and this is a good thing, gone are the days where we've normalized exclusionary disciplinary practices. We're learning institutions, not punitive institutions. Gone are the days where we normalize bullying and aggression. That's a part of going to school when I was a kid. Gone are the days where we tolerated the normalization of hostile work and learning environments. These are all good things. And when we talk about quality instruction, traditional instructional practices are not enough. Kids learn differently. They need different modalities, methodologies. They need the infusion of technology. And more than ever, they need relationships. This is where community involvement is more important than ever. And in the end, how do we measure success? Well, we've moved past the normalization of low expectations. I once had a staff tell me, Tony, you're being too ambitious in what you want from us. Think about our demographic. To which I responded, I am the demographic. But I want to focus on responsiveness. And responsiveness, what's not different, it always allowed individuals to understand different perspectives. Back in 1981, I wrote an essay about Ronald Reagan when he was running for president. I'm not going to say if I was for or against Ronald, but I wrote this as a kid growing up in poverty and as an English language learner. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. That means that in a couple years, the poor are going to be so poor that they won't be able to afford to go to school, and they won't have an education. And if you don't have an education, you can't get a job. And if you don't have a job, you will get poor. Pretty sage for a little 5th grade boy learning English for the first time. And what's different now about responsiveness is that perspective is often forged by experience. Being colorblind or this notion that we're a melting pot can invalidate a person's perspective, and people want to be seen. So I'm going to ask you to be responsive to me as I am responsive to myself. I mentioned that I'm half Uruguayan. It is, in fact, a real country, half Dominican. But if you look at my genetic makeup, I'm 13% Scottish, 5% French, 4% Irish. I am just as much from these European countries as I am from Africa. And when you look at my nieces and nephews, who are all first cousins, they represent different nationalities, skin tones, religions. My kids identify as Jewish. So I have to be responsive to them because the way they navigate life is different based upon the way they look. Yet we're all first cousins. They're all Santanas. And I want to tell you a little story about my own experience that I would never have in a million years have shared in a room full of educators. My mom taught me to know my place, that I would be treated differently, and that if I wanted to be equal, I would have to work twice as hard. When I was in 5th grade, I broke my leg in school. My school nurse poo-pooed my complaints of pain and actually sent me walking home. We got to the emergency room after my mother panicked and saw the swelling in my leg, and we weren't seen for 10 hours, while other people were seen. Never before in my life did I know my place. In 1989, the Central Park 5 case, Wilding, all of us black and brown kids in New York City were on edge because we were the enemy. We were characterized as animals who were willing to engage in these horrific acts just for fun. It was a tough time to be a teenager in New York City. That same year, I gained acceptance to Cornell, and I felt proud of myself. But many on that campus told us, the students of color, that we didn't belong, that we were products of affirmative action, that we took away seats from deserving students. More than that, I pledged a Latino fraternity, Lambda Upsilon Lambda Fraternity Incorporated. I have a fraternity brother in Anibal right there. And we were called banana Nazis. We were also told that there was little racist segments around the campus, and the way you could identify a racist house were the houses that prominently displayed the American flag. This was true for us back then. But what's also true, if you open your mind, is that my broken leg served as a prop when I played a Valley Forge soldier in a George Washington skit on David Letterman. And never before did I feel so proud to be American. In 1989, I spoke at a press conference along with the late Chancellor Green, where I advocated for students and public school students, indicating that we're not all animals. And Chancellor Green told me that I was a bright young man with a bright future, and that made the world of difference to me. And yeah, I grew up in poverty, the son of an immigrant, and I got to attend a great school like Cornell University, and I had great professors who helped pave the way for my future. So yes, I am a proud American. I wear this American flag on my lapel proudly. But we need to appreciate the whole picture, all of it together, the good and the bad. Because ultimately, what lies beneath all this stuff is kindness. Have an open heart, have an open mind, listen to each other, appreciate other people's perspective, and don't be shy about it. Advertise it. The world is different, and we're not going back. So how can we best push through our anxiety and uncertainty to provide our students with an experience that meets the academic, social, and emotional needs? Well, first, have the audacity to be responsive to yourself so that you're best equipped to help others. Second, have the audacity to be responsive to others so that you're best equipped to help yourself. And last but not least, above and beyond all else, have the audacity to let kindness be your North Star. And when all else fails, thank you. Have the audacity to lead for all. And it is with thank you so much. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Tanya Thompson from the Binghamton City School District.
I'm not going to talk about Butterfingers. What I would like you to do is to think about the last time you were on an elevator and how comfortable you felt. There were likely people that you knew, and there were others that you did not. And for those that you knew, you probably could figure out what they were thinking and feeling. But for those that you did not know, you probably didn't realize the impact that your emotions were having on them. Our brains are composed of 10 billion neurons, and they have the incredible capacity for empathy and emotion. There are specialized neurons known as mirror neurons, whose job it is to mirror or mimic the emotions of others. This is how we can feel, how they're feeling, and we can make an immediate connection. Now back to the elevator. You immediately, if you're surrounded by people you don't know, you're likely going to be experiencing both physical and emotional discomfort. Is somebody touching my back? How much longer do I have to stand here? Your I or your ego begins to take over. Your mind has a natural tendency to create a physical and emotional space between you and those people. This is a defining moment of discomfort. Now, I'm not going to talk about physical discomfort. We have all had our share of bumps and bruises to know what that's all about. But I am going to talk about two forms of emotional discomfort. The discomfort that comes when we as superintendents are wrong, and the discomfort that comes when we have a challenge to our conditioned state. And I'm going to follow that with 5 tactics or strategies that you can employ that can help you become sane in those significant moments of discomfort, particularly when they're in public, as well as perhaps strengthen your ability to lead during those moments. There is a universal joy experienced when we're right. You ordered the correct dessert for your significant other when they got up from the table to go to the bathroom, or you were convinced when you told your Board of Education that the community was going to support the last capital vote. To be wrong or to experience something that makes us feel uncomfortable just feels wrong. But there's a magnitude that exists within our experiences. And we often tend, when we are wrong, to divert or downplay the incident and focus more on the why. Admitting halfway through a conversation that you just named the wrong team that won the 1964 World Series is significantly different than admitting halfway through a lifetime perhaps you were married to the wrong person. What's really important is that we acknowledge our wrongness. Seems simple. Just say, I was wrong. Well, we also have a tendency to not hesitate, whether it's outwardly or in our own minds, to point out when others are wrong. And there's a magnitude associated with this as well. A small error, such as forgetting your wallet in the car when the bill comes, is one thing. But admitting to your Board of Education that you didn't take into consideration the increase in minimum wage when you negotiated the last CSEA contract is quite another thing. It's simply less painful, right, to point out when others are wrong. Now, you can be right, or you can be in a relationship. And there's also the degree in which you're willing to admit that you're wrong can also be tied to the stakes. Because when you criticize others, it's easier and less painful, and that's because we're not tied emotionally and it's not connected to their beliefs and values as we are our own. And to be wrong also has its roots in being bad or being evil, and this is probably why we're less likely to admit to ourselves that we're wrong as well. It comes down to the stakes of our mistakes. Now, the feeling of being wrong, or when we don't get our way, and as a side, I'd like to thank Dr. Andrew's mother for providing this picture when he was younger. It lasts longer, right? Our physical discomfort can come and go, but the discomfort of emotionally being harmed can last, in many cases, a lifetime. What we need to do in those moments is just to admit that we don't always know everything, in spite of what our boards and our communities want to believe. Now, it's not okay if I say the sky is blue and you say it's green, but it's perfectly okay if my favorite color is blue and your favorite color is green. We all have our own preferences. Our preferences are brought to these conversations, and they are built on our age, our culture, right? This is where our bias lies. And examining the way we respond to our wrongness helps us better understand our own beliefs and convictions. And this leads me to our second area of emotional discomfort, which is a challenge to our conditioned state. right? And when our conditioned state is challenged, and our conditioned state is based on the regular routines that we experience each and every day. It's where we're safe, right? Where we're comfortable. And when this happens, we often freeze. We often begin to have some self-doubt, and we want to go back into that comfortable space. But again, admitting that that there are other preferences and other ways of looking at the world in that moment can help us persevere through. Now, I'm not suggesting that you engage in uncomfortable conversations that are unsafe. Unfortunately, as superintendents, though, there are moments when that happens. And I'm certainly not suggesting that you push aside everything that's worked for you and that you're really skilled at, the proverbial throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But what I am suggesting is that when you're in uncomfortable situations, that you're unafraid to embrace what's unfamiliar, even in the most situations that feel less than comfortable. Now, there have been hundreds of books written over the past decade on critical, crucial, and uncomfortable conversations. And through these books, we have begun to recognize that as executives, it's perfectly okay to embrace in conversations with mentors and coaches. In fact, it's become the new norm for us. But adversity and discomfort have become the new catalyst for transformation. Now, we have all experienced, many of us have experienced, discomfort in many forms. Sometimes it comes through passionate parents, groups of community members that come and advocate for what they feel is right, occasionally a student or a faculty member who may have made a poor decision. So what are we to do? Well, I'd like to suggest 5 tactics that, when employed, can open up spaces, minds, and result in improved results for yourself and for your organization. The first strategy is to pause. Now, it sounds simple as well, but your mind is often racing in terms of understanding what's going on in the moment. But pausing allows for you to collect your own thoughts. It also allows for the other individual to do the same. It can be something as simple as suggesting you going to another room and being able to walk down the hall to give you that think time. Or often I will get up away from my desk and say, let me get you a bottle of water, allowing myself to walk down the hall and get that in return. Pausing also allows you to engage in the second strategy, which is to relax. Many of us have been taught through yoga and through other activities how to engage in deep abdominal breathing, and doing that can provide a full relaxation throughout your entire body. Another strategy that you might want to try is what's called progressive muscle tension, where you contract and relax a part of your muscle in one part of your body and then gradually progress to another. Those moments of relaxation allow you to step back for a moment and then re-engage in the conversation even better. Now, when you're in that conversation and it is heated, one of the ways in which you can demonstrate that you're actively listening is through paraphrasing. Paraphrasing at times can feel condescending, but what you're actually doing is affirming and validating what the other person's saying and how they're feeling. And following that paraphrase with a question allows you to take direction of that conversation. Cognitive coaching has taught us that using a term such as "tell me more" opens up the thinking of both parties involved in the conversation. Now, when you're engaged in the conversation, and oftentimes people will come very heated, ask yourself, what must that person have experienced across their lifetime to be that upset, to be thinking that way and feeling that way? Thinking about the perspectives of others and the impact on your conversation. How is what I'm about to decide going to impact students, faculty, staff, and the community at large? You're also going to think about how you're feeling in the moment, but how is this really going to feel tomorrow, a month from now, or a year from now? And don't forget to give yourself credit for dealing with situations like this before. We often don't recognize the resiliency that we really have within us. And lastly, focus on the positive. Positive thinking leads to gratitude, and we know that gratitude is associated with increased happiness and decreased stress. Positivity has also been associated with building your resilience, so in those moments in a setback in a conversation, you're able to bounce back better. And finally, positivity is also proven to lead to better decision making, fueling motivation and creativity. So I challenge you this year, the next time you're in an uncomfortable conversation, I'd like you to think about how you felt in that moment, and were you able to employ one or more of these strategies? When we're engaged in conversations like this, you have the power to create improved results, not only for yourself as a leader, for your own health outcomes, and for results for your entire community. Your next opportunity for positive change is likely disguised as an uncomfortable situation. Thank you.